Hey all, this is Kasak my Het-Heru here, and today I have an interesting broadcast for you. I want to talk about how the reality matrix works, and I'll go into a little bit of the after death experience. Is there life after death? But I want to take a step back before I get into the details of this, because this is a really big subject, and I haven't prepared any notes, but I'm going to try and go into this. Because explaining the actual concept of the matrix and how it works departs somewhat from the movies that we are accustomed to watching. And to get a better understanding, we need to understand our ancient ancestors, the priests, the shaman and shawomen, is it, or shaman? And the priests and priestesses and the things that they did thousands of years ago, and the world they envisioned putting in place, which is basically been changed and not come to fruition, because there was a plan in place of how we should be living today, and we're not living in that way because we are living in a very corrupt system, not just a corrupt system of government, but a corrupt society and its ideology and its way of life. And take a look at some of our previous videos, specifically on what is the problem with the world today, because a lot of people, when you ask that question, they want to say, oh, well, it is politicians, it's corrupt politicians, it is, our government. But the reality is, it is the way in which we are thinking, and that is left brain thinking, which has dominated the planet and caused a lot of confusion. You see, when you think primarily of the left brain cannot think in terms of, it's not very fluid. It has to think in terms of paradigm. So it has to have something to reference. This is why most of the religions, you have Christianity, Judaism, Catholicism, Islam, are predicated upon a book from which we reference and understand how to live our lives. And that's, again, comes through the way they teach this is to verbal oratory skills, verbal discourse, and getting you to kind of comply to an exterior all-powerful being, right? But if you understand how the brain is constructed, which is meant to be kind of like filters in a way, where, it's how we process information, and how we see and perceive the world. So if you're only using the left brain, how do you see and perceive the world? You see it's in terms of segregated, separate individual pieces with no connection to the whole. All right. Whereas our ancestors, who were integrated brain thinkers, meaning they thought through the right brain and the left brain, and it was whole brain thinking. And the way they perceive the world is that everything is one, everything is connected. All right. So this is important to understand before I go any further, because when you boil it down to its core, the problem with the world is that we are seeing things from a segregated, separate, individualized process. And it's an illusion, because that is not actually the way the world is. Now, let's go into the whole idea of the matrix and the after-death experience. One of the things that we have to understand is that we are not the physical body, we are consciousness, all right? And we're consciousness, and we are having an experience, okay? We're interacting with versions of ourselves who we call people, all right? So Neter, God, Yahweh, or whatever you want to call him or her, put its consciousness within us so that it could have an experience. See, in the beginning, there was only Neter, or God. And as we know, God has infinite power. God is all powerful, right? But the one thing God didn't have was experience, because in the beginning, there was only the one. And because there's only the one, there's nothing to interact with. So God had to create, or let's put it more precisely, individualize itself, to create individual aspects, which we call the objective realm, or the realm that you see around us. And the way to remember that is think of objects. So from the one came many, or objects, or individualization, so that God, Neter, could interact with itself. And interacting with itself, it would gain the experience of who and what it is. All right. So with that in mind, we have to understand that the individualization is there, and we're interacting with for the purpose of the experience. But however, we in a way have tricked ourselves into believing that we are separate, but we're not. We're all part of the same consciousness. There's only one consciousness. There's not individualized consciousness. All right. Now, taking that a step further, and we have to look at things in this way. As I talked about, let's talk about like when Netta was first in existence, or Netta was always in existence, but it was only the one. We call that the subjective realm. And then when Netta individualized itself, it created the individual separate things. We call that the objective realm. All right. In that same way, we do also have two other realms that we need to think about, right? Because as you know, you have your conscious waking state. And when you're asleep, some people say you're unconscious or you're tapping into the subconsciousness, right? Now, those individuals and these things that we're interacting with, cars, trains, other people, are projections. They are a holographic projections of things so that we can interact with them, but they do not represent the reality itself. They're symbols, they're metaphors of things that are going on within our minds. So when you see a mailbox is not really a mailbox, but it's a metaphor for something that's going on within you. And we know this because we go by as above, so below. So when you're dreaming, if you notice in your dreams, you'll be talking to, let's say, a duck, and the duck is speaking English to you. And in your dream, you think this is perfectly normal, right? But it's not. And so you want to know, what is the meaning of this? So you understand the duck isn't really a duck. It's an emotional message that's trying to communicate to you. So subconscious mind trying to tell you something using your representation or the symbol of the duck. All right. Same thing is going on in real life. Everything that you see around you are merely symbols, and they have meanings. They are analogous to certain things, and if you understand how to interpret them, you understand what's going on within you. And this is how our ancestors operated, because we saw all things not only as a part of the whole, but as omens. And these things, we look at these omens and we understand what's going on within ourselves, and we understand what's going on in the world around us. And it would tell us future events, past events, present events, what's going to happen. All right. And the one thing that we have to keep in mind, which is a purely left brain way of thinking, is that you falsely believe that there is an outside world when there is no outside world. Science has already proven that through these synaptic connections in the brain, we actually are creating the reality around us, and it can be altered. They've tapped into patients who are on operating table doing brain surgery, who they actually have to keep somewhat awake, and they have to talk to these individuals while they're doing the brain surgery. They know that they can stimulate certain parts of the brain to make this individual see or experience certain things. They can experience the past, they can experience the future, they can take away their sight, they can take away their hearing, and this is all through manipulating the connections in the brain. So what we have to understand is that the reality that we see around us is not really there, but it's formed in the mind itself. But we falsely believe that there is an external world. In the same way, we falsely believe that there is an external God, when we don't understand that God is consciousness and consciousness is within us. So if you want to experience God, you have to go within, which is the basis of all non-Western religions. Western religions always teach that you have to submit to an external, all-powerful being. Whereas if you go to places like Africa, China, and India, you'll find that a lot of their religions teach about going within and experiencing the oneness of all things in God. This is why a lot of people get into certain psychedelic drugs like DMT, ayahuasca, things like that. Now, if we understand that there is no external thing out there, that every object is merely a metaphor, a way of ourselves communicating to ourselves, through signs, symbols, and metaphors, then we get a better understanding of what's going on here. So now let's take this a step further. All right. Now, the problem that we are encountering is that when you think primarily out of the left brain, everything you do is based on that mode of thinking. And it also creates a lot of problems. Einstein said you cannot solve a problem using the same mindset that created it. So we have a left brain creating all of these things around us, universities, it's creating corporations, it's creating religions, and which we see has created a lot of havoc in our world, because one of the things the left brain is very good at creating and has created is racism and sexism, because it doesn't see the connection. It doesn't see how things are similar. It doesn't have the left brain is not the seat of morality. It's the right brain that deals with morality. All right. And congregative thinking is a right brain process where it seeks to see how things are similar and bring things together. All right. So as we move on, then we begin to understand that if we want to understand the world better, we have to look at it through a different hemisphere of the brain. Now, the problem is that when we look at the ancient scriptures, when we look at history books, you'll notice, especially like the Bible, the Quran and all that, they talk about, when you die, your soul travels and you go to heaven or you go to hell. Now, if you understand that one of the properties of the left brain is linear space-time, and one of the properties or attributes of the right brain is nonlinear thought and non-locality. And what I mean by that is there is no fixed place in subconsciousness or subconscious realm. All right. It's not subject to space and time. All right. So let me explain a little bit better so that comes across. And this is really, really good stuff, is that when you are reading these scriptures and you're reading these ancient so-called sacred texts, you'll see that, like, for example, the Greek culture, the Greek religions talked about Zeus, or, in a chariot and riding across the heavens. Now, that denotes fixed points in space and time, traveling from point A to point B. Okay. And if you understand that when you get into the inner planes, the afterlife, or another alternate state of consciousness or another dimension, that there is no fixed point in space and time. It is not subject to that. It's the consciousness has a principle of non-locality. You cannot plot it in any one point in space and time. So if that is true, and if we understand that that is the attribute of, let's say, the subconsciousness, or the alternate planes of existence or dimensions, then you understand one thing, that everything around you that you see is merely, and this is an analogy, let me use this analogy, it's like you have a canvas, and on this canvas you can paint anything you want. I choose to paint modern day America, 21st century, right? But it could be anything. It could be anything, because as I said before, it's your perception and you're creating the reality there. Now, if we were to die, would reality around us still continue? No, it would not, because reality doesn't exist apart from the observer, because the conscious observer is the one that is creating the reality before you. So if everybody around us, what we think are living beings, are merely avatars or representations of different people or aspects within ourselves, and the body dies, then this holographic scenario stops. Now, what happens then? Does your soul travel to heaven, hell, the afterlife, or wherever? No, because traveling, again, denotes linear space-time. So you're not actually traveling, because you are already there. As I always say, you're a multi-dimensional being. I'm not saying you travel to different dimensions. I'm saying you're already there. There's a great line in one of the movies that I love, which didn't do well at the box office, which is 2001: A Space Odyssey, the sequel called 2010, the year we make contact, right? Dave Bowman who went through a wormhole and became like this higher consciousness, was speaking with his wife as a spirit or what have you. And he only had a limited time in which he was allowed to talk to her. And then as he was leaving, he said, look, I have to go. And she says, don't go. And he said these important words. He says, well, I'm already there. You know, so if you understand, again, you're a multidimensional being, that you exist in all places at once. You're not confined to any one place in space and time. Then we have to understand that when you die, you're not traveling anywhere because you're already there. It's merely going back to the analogy of the canvas and the painting, is that you're just painting a different picture now because you're moving, you're experiencing a different reality now. So you're painting a different picture, but you're not traveling or going anywhere because there's no place to go because you're every place. All right. And with that, we have to understand the fallacy that goes along with some of the scriptures, which talks about riding the chariot across the heavens, or the soul traveling, or being the soul traveling to be with God, or to be with your loved ones that passed away. That's not exactly true, but I understand that it's a storytelling device that has to be told in that manner, because the left brain can only conceive and communicate in space-time. Do you understand? So the left brain says, yes, there is fixed point A, which then you move to fixed point B, where the right brain says there is no fixed point A or fixed point B. There is everything, and everything is one. And everything is instantaneous. There's no time there to where things take to manifest. All things exist at the same time, and you're interacting with all things. So I hope that answers the question of the afterlife. Now, how does this matrix work? So, well, if you understand that you are consciousness, right? And consciousness creates the reality before you, then you understand that consciousness is intelligence, and consciousness is creating things and communicating with you all the time. And that reality is not objective, meaning reality that we see is not fixed. We're constantly creating it based on our beliefs and emotions. So if that is true, then there is a way of communicating with consciousness, to have consciousness manifest the things that we want, or to tell us and warn us about things. And this is what our ancestors practiced, and this is what our ancestors did. And this is all possible. Do you understand? The Native American culture called it, called God or consciousness the Great Spirit, because we know that we're interacting with a living, breathing universe, a living, breathing realm. And let me get a little bit more specific on that. Nikola Tesla said, we don't exist on a planet. We don't exist in a universe. We exist in a realm. And I'll take that further by saying we exist in a state, because we know that the state of reality that we think is the fourth dimensional plane is really a reality tunnel, or a state of hypnosis. We are hypnotized into believing that these things are around us, have solidity, that they are real, that they have color, that they have smell, but that's not true. And when we start to understand that these things are merely our own perceptions being projected outward, then we gain the power to change those things. Then we gain the power to communicate with a higher intelligence, which is us. And we can communicate and talk through that intelligence to gain wisdom and insight. People say, well, I saw Jesus in the clouds, or I saw, I saw Jesus in a jar of mayonnaise. That is really consciousness affecting the reality of the world to give you something that you are familiar with and that you want, which is an image of your savior, and some people see, other people see Muhammad and Buddha and everything, and they, you know, we must not discount that, because they are manufacturing and creating that type of reality within their fourth dimensional plane. That's what they want to see. That's what you can create. You know, some people see the Virgin Mary in a puddle of water. So this is all within you and your power to manipulate and create around you. And it gives us so much power, because the ruling elite want us to understand that we are separate from everything, and that we have no control over the outside world, and that the outside world is the outside, that there is an outside, and there is a being up there and not within here. And if you fall susceptible to that ideology, then you lose your true power that's within you to be the master of your destiny, master of your universe. Because remember, you came here to gain experience, to interact with a holographic projection that is essentially symbols and signs that is what's going on within you to experience your destiny. So with that said, I hope this explains I hope this explains a lot about the afterlife and the matrix, and how we can control this thing we call the matrix. And remember, there is no traveling, there is no going anywhere, because you're already there. You're a multidimensional being, and your dying ends one holographic scenario where another one moves in its place, and you're not traveling anywhere to get to anything. All right. So this is Gasank Ma Het-Heru. If you like this broadcast, please subscribe to this channel and like the video. Until my next video, that's all for now.